Every year, thousands of names are added to the DSO list of people waiting for services and supports. These people are ranked according to priority and offered funding and placements based on their priority and the suitability of the placements available. This is not unlike other funding sources in the province, such as childcare subsidy, rent geared to income, OSAP, and many others. Many people who still live at home will wait many years for placement because so many other families are in crisis and require immediate placement due to sudden and unchangeable living situations. This might include caregiver sickness or even death. For this reason, many families are urged to create a strong support network and start applying for services when their children are 17 and a half years old, even if they don't need the services. Today we will explore the topic of families of individuals with developmental disabilities and the supports available to them through the story of Amanda Telford and her son. Amanda Telford has a Master's of Social Work from Carleton University. She also has over 20 years' experience in the field. She specializes in providing support to children, teens, and families as they navigate through social, developmental, and behavioral challenges. Amanda has a son who has been diagnosed with autism, Tourette's, and diabetes. He had recently entered the adult world of services and supports and had been waitlisted, as most people are at the age of 18. Due to his medical and high behavior support needs, the family was in need of services and supports to ensure a better quality of life. He qualified for respite funding, but the staff at the agency providing respite were not trained in insulin injections, so he was not accepted into this program. On April 30th, 2013, Amanda Telford made the decision to drop her 19-year-old son off at a local Developmental Services Ontario office with a letter explaining her situation. Social Services was contacted and they deemed the situation abandonment. He was temporarily placed in care and his parents were granted visitation. Eventually, he was granted funding for full-time residential supports and a day program. The problem with this is that he has been moved from place to place to place because there is no place that can take him permanently. We have explored various sources such as media releases, articles, Amanda Telford's business website, and the Ombudsman report in hopes of catching all angles of this event. This debate seeks to critically analyze the facts of the case in order to explore whether or not her actions justifiably suited the situation.
A mother that is unable to handle her son's aggressive behaviors and impulsivity had no other options. She was stuck between having to work to afford the available supports for him and being called to come pick him up hours into respite due to his behaviors. The lack of emergency services gave this mother no other options than the extreme measure of leaving him at the doors of the DSO. Amanda, though faced with a difficult choice, acquired her intention by getting their family supports. When these drastic measures are taken, the government is forced to be involved and recognize that families with children with developmental disabilities are in crisis with nowhere to turn. Amanda's decision to leave her child at the DSO reflects a crisis in the developmental sector where services and supports are lacking or unavailable.
We agree that the system is at fault. What we disagree with is leaving your child in the hands of the government. We believe that effort must be given by the communities in which we live to help with the challenges that fellow community members face. Amanda Telford was a social worker aware of how to use the system in order to gain attention and used her child as a scapegoat. Amanda could have just as easily gone to the press, written letters to her local politicians, organized meetings, rallies, circles of support, or used social media to better convey her message. When we place all the expectations on our government to care for high-needs children, we continue to orphan these vulnerable populations, furthering their vulnerabilities. Furthermore, by placing our children in the care of government, we can enable the system at large to hold even more power over people's lives, especially those living with developmental disabilities. According to the Guardian article in September 2016, 8 million children live in orphanages across the world. 90% of those have at least one living parent. Many of these children have disabilities. In the same article, it states that young adults raised in institutions are 500 times more likely to kill themselves. Though this article is typically focusing on countries around the world, it is important to understand the global impact of abandoning children with disabilities. Will Amanda's choice impact the system, or will it rather enable other desperate parents to opt for the decision to abandon their children as well? If so, how soon will institutional care be reinstated? We understand the need for services and funding for families, but believe that Amanda Telford's method of acquiring services placed her own child in a position to be exploited.
Telford did go to politicians for help, and while they were sympathetic to her family's situation, they were unable to help her. Those endeavors were fruitless, and continuing to use time on them simply caused further stress to Amanda and her family. Amanda and her husband were suffering the ill effects of the stress of their situation on their health, and this in turn put their son in more danger. His life was in danger every day that he was in the home without support. He wandered often and at one point took unprescribed blood pressure medication, resulting in a hospitalization. And when he came out of the hospital, promptly wandered again. Leaving him in front of the DSO was her only choice, and it is likely that that choice saved his life. Parents are the catalyst for change. When they speak as a collective, people listen. Amanda bringing light to the flaws in the system in this way protected her son, and now he is receiving the care he needs.
We are not disputing that Amanda Telford and her family were not living in a crisis situation. What we are disputing, however, is the fact that she could have taken different avenues to get the services that she was looking for. There are a great deal of families living in crisis in Ontario, and they are not dropping their children off at the DSO office. Why? Because we as parents will do anything and everything we can to protect our children, and dropping them off at the DSO office is not an option. Amanda Telford is a social worker. She used her background knowledge of our system to know that she could leave her son at the DSO office and she would get the media attention that she was looking for. Amanda Telford's actions were politically driven. She knew that she would make big waves in our world by dropping her son off at the DSO office. Amanda Telford also contacted the Ombudsman, and her story was published in his report that was released in August 2016, titled Nowhere to Turn. Her son's name was changed in the report, but it was definitely their story. The Ombuds referenced the many gaps in our system, and we are not disputing that we have a very long way to go in the developmental sector. But what we are saying is that if Amanda could spend the better part of 20 years of her life counseling and teaching families how to deal with crisis situations with children with things such as ASD and other disabilities, how come she couldn't do that for her own family? How come she didn't know how to deal with crisis in her own family? Amanda knew that by dropping her son off at the DSO office, she was not abandoning him. She knew full well that she would see him again. It gave her the one-up on the government that she needed to get the supports that she was looking for. Unfortunately, by Amanda Telford opening up this door and dropping off her son at the DSO office, it has opened up doors for other families and caregivers alike to drop their children off at the DSO office when things get too tough. And this opens up doors for abandonment in our sector, and we're already dealing with a very vulnerable population, so we wouldn't want that.
Telford's actions reflected the developmental service crisis. Her son's safety and well-being was in danger, and they had nowhere to turn due to the lack of services available. The argument that Amanda's decision was politically motivated was correct, but we argue that there is nothing wrong with strong political statements. When people make strong political statements, such as Amanda's, the government hears the public and is forced to recognize these people falling through the cracks of our system. At the end of the day, because of Amanda's actions, her son is now safe and is getting the supports and services that he needs.
Even though Amanda Telford did get what she wanted by dropping off her son at the doors of the DSO, she abandoned her medically and behaviorally challenged son in a very vulnerable spot that he would have been taken advantage of or in worst case ran out to traffic. Her decision to leave her son there was politically driven. She was a social worker and knew leaving him there would get a lot of attention from the media. By leaving her son there, she enabled the government to have more power over the people we support. Though she did get her son a spot, doing so she enabled other parents to abandon their children into institutional care. Communities should be held accountable for the care of the children rather than relying on the government. In closing, I think Amanda had a valid point, but there could and should have been other avenues and resources she could have taken. We believe that community involvement is of the utmost importance to make safe and inclusive environments so we don't have to turn to the government to care for our children.
So now you've heard the facts. You've heard about a mother who was struggling to support her son, a woman who had 20 years of experience in the field who was politically driven, about a flawed system. You've heard it from several different angles, and now it's up to you to decide whether or not Amanda Telford's actions were justifiable or not. We invite you to make up your own mind and let us know what you think. Should Amanda Telford have found better ways to provide alternative support to her son and deal with her situation, or was her action just what was needed to show the holes in our system.